Well, welcome again this morning to the Ardèche. This morning again is heavy activity and work on a number of policy issues. Again, dealing with the issue of childcare, the unveiling of our housing policy later. The theme basically about being struggling families and struggling communities. And our assertion is that in terms of the implementation of government policy is that many families have been left behind. And that's reflected particularly in the mortgage arrears situation and household debt. And there's been no meaningful effort to come to grips with that during the lifetime of this government. Despite some very constructive interventions by ourselves in the form of legislation, for example, to have an independent debt resolution office, which would have effectively had effective mediation and arbitration between the banks and people in debt to ensure that debt resolution deals were done effectively and in the best interest of all concerned, and particularly those in mortgage arrears. And our experience on the ground has shown that many families have come to us very anxious, and I think banks at times don't realise the stress and anxiety they cause when they send out letters and threatening letters to families, and all for the want of lack of engagement. And sometimes when engagement happens, things can get resolved. But I think the government has rejected our measures time and time again, and now at the end of its term in office, it's now talking about diluting the government's veto in relation to the stranglehold that the banks have had on the mortgage arrears situation. We've also had the variable rate mortgages scams and the excessive interest rates that have been charged there, and again we've highlighted that very effectively in the door. On childcare, again in terms of families with young children, this is an enormous bill that they are facing on an ongoing basis. And again, it is strangling families and creating huge pressure and anxieties. And again, being on the doorstep and on the ground, we've picked this up and we've responded to it in the form of the childcare proposals that Robert Troy has brought forward. He published a document a year ago. He has refined and fine-tuned that. I think they're very substantial and meaningful proposals that would impact positively on the childcare sector itself, and also in terms of affordability for families in situations where they're finding the childcare issue and costs excessive and unbearable. We have other issues in terms of education that have been discussed this morning, and broadly then in terms of communities, the neglect and the cuts in leader funding and the political interference in local development funding, which this government, begun under Phil Hogan, has consistently pushed, and the removal of the autonomy that leader companies and local development companies had in terms of the development of their local communities with the funding that was then allocated. I would like to make a number of further comments on the SiteServe controversy. I think it's with amazement again this morning that people read that the actual accountant who was being asked to investigate the SiteServe deal was the accountant who actually oversaw the payment of the 5 million to the shareholders. And we learn also that SiteServe was actually liquidated. Its trading assets were sold, and that the accountant himself, Kieran Wallace, was the actual liquidator of SiteServe, and as such oversaw the payment of the 5 million to the shareholders. Now that's on the Irish Independent this morning. Covered that. That is amazing, quite frankly, and quite incredible. And I said it yesterday, and a lot of people I've spoken to who are objectively well back in this, the perception of the conflict of interest is all wrong here. I cannot understand how the Minister for Finance and how the government have gone with this, and I certainly cannot understand how the Labour Party have accepted it, given that Joan Burton said in the Dáil, the Taoiseach said in the Dáil, that she wanted an independent, competent authority. This is not independent. It's not independent. First of all, it's the very company that was involved in advising on the sale and agreeing with the sale and supporting the sale that's been asked to investigate this. And now we learned this morning that the actual individuals concerned are the same individuals who oversaw the liquidation of the old SiteServe company. This is extraordinary by any stretch of the imagination in terms of the setting up of any inquiry that I personally have ever come across. And I'm somewhat taken back by a certain sort of acquiescence generally to what's going on. And I think people in government, and particularly I would at this stage appeal to the Taoiseach and the Labour Party to stand back from this and wake up and do what is right by the public interest, and that is to set up a commission of investigation which will be at arm's length, which will have the capacity to compel documents, to meet the individuals concerned, and to give a truly independent account of it. And we know now from the exchanges yesterday between the former Secretary General John Morton and the former Chairman of IBRC Alan Jewett that this is getting wider in terms of the issues that need to be covered, and that not only is it the wrong people and the wrong company doing the investigation, the terms of reference are far too narrow and are skewed in terms of ensuring that the inquiry goes down a particular route and excluding a lot of issues that now need to be dealt with. And finally, I would say that on reflection, I think the former Chairman Alan Jewett was overly arrogant in terms of his dismissal and dismissive attitude to our public servants in the Department of Finance, in terms of he describing their state of knowledge of the banking system. I think a bit of humility all round wouldn't go astray in terms of so-called expertise in the banking world, because we know too much about that and where that got us. And so less of the deference to that world as opposed to people in the shareholding unit of the Department of Finance who raised legitimate concerns. Those legitimate concerns were not acted on in any substantial way by the Minister for Finance. We don't know why. He said he accepted the assurances of the Chairman, but we do not know on what basis he accepted those assurances, because Alan Jewett said he didn't do an independent review. So we're not quite clear on what basis those assurances were accepted.